Hello. You may be wondering where I am and what I'm doing. I'm in my living room and I'm sitting on the floor. Both my kids are asleep and I'm trying to be quiet. But welcome to our second chapel. Starting next week, we're going to do what we call Chapel on Tour. But until then, this week we talked about how God created man. God formed man out of the dust of the earth and he breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And it was an awesome lesson, and all of you got to play with Play-Doh, and you got to take turns forming your man, right? And as I was sitting there thinking about our lesson this week and how to kind of tie that into chapel, I kept thinking about instruments. Instruments, like musical instruments. You may be thinking something along the lines of this. Maybe. Or maybe you're thinking something like this. No? Yes? Or this? Or even something small, like this. But an instrument doesn't actually have to be musical. It is something that serves a purpose. For example, this is a lighter. Its purpose is to create a flame in order to light something like a candle. Or along the same lines, you have something like this. This is a flashlight. And what does that do? It lights the way, particularly if you can't see, you need a flashlight. Or something like this could be considered an instrument. When my husband came to visit me when I was living in China, we went to a kung fu show and bought, oh man, I don't even know how to open this. This sword that I don't know how to open. And that's probably a good thing. If I called him over, he would show me. But in any case, inside of this sheath is a sword that would be used in a battle. I'm gonna wake up my kids. These instruments serve a purpose. Sometimes we see instruments and their purpose, we're not quite sure what it is. Like this. Anyone know what this is? Any ideas? Well, some of you may know. We'll set that to the side for right now. There's a verse that I thought about with these instruments, with man being created in the image of God, formed out of the dust of the earth. I want you to think of this verse. Keep this in the back of your mind. Ephesians 2:10. For we are his, God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath ordained, he's purposed beforehand that we should walk in them. So we were given a specific purpose before we were even born. Well, I'm gonna tell you a story about a man whose name was Peter. Does anybody know about Peter? We're gonna read about him right now, okay? And this is called The Friend Who Forgives. A long time ago, there was a man named Peter who was best friends with Jesus. Peter was a fisherman. He was strong, he was brave, but he often said the wrong thing. Do you ever talk before you think? That's what Peter did, again and again and again. I'm a lot like Peter. Peter loved to fish. In fact, one day he and Jesus had fish for breakfast. Fish for breakfast? That's weird. But we'll save that part for the end of the story. One day when Jesus first called Peter to follow him, can you guess what Peter was doing? That's right. Peter was fishing. Follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men, Jesus told him. Can you imagine that? Peter fishing for men. Jesus explained that just as Peter liked to search for fish, Jesus had come to search for people who needed forgiveness. Peter loved being friends with Jesus. He saw Jesus do lots of amazing things. One time, Peter's mother-in-law was sick. Jesus healed her. Another time, Peter was about to drown in a storm. Jesus saved him. Slowly, Peter realized that Jesus was more than a friend. He was God. He would never let Peter down. But sometimes Peter let Jesus down, like the time that Jesus explained to his friends that he had to die on a cross, but that he would come back to life to offer forgiveness. All of you will run away. You're going to say, "You're not my friends," Jesus said. Peter spoke up right away. He did that a lot. "I will never do that," Peter said. But Jesus told him, "Before the rooster crows in the morning, you will say 3 times that you're not my friend." I would never do that. Jesus is my best friend, Peter thought. When the soldiers came to take Jesus to the cross, Peter pulled out his sword to stop them. Kind of like the sword that I have over there. "Put your sword away, Peter," Jesus said. "My Father says this must happen." Jesus let the soldiers take him to the courtyard to stand trial. Peter followed from far away. "Aren't you one of Jesus' friends?" a young girl asked as she opened the gate for Peter to enter the courtyard. What do you think Peter said? "No, I don't know Jesus." It was a cold night, so Peter walked over to a fire where some people were warming themselves. "Aren't you one of Jesus' friends?" someone else asked Peter. "What do you think?" Peter said. "No, I don't know Jesus." Then someone else stepped forward and looked closely at Peter. "Yes, you are one of Jesus' friends, aren't you?" he said. What do you think Peter said? "No, I don't know Jesus." Right then, at that very moment, a rooster crowed. Jesus turned around and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said. "Before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times, 'You're not my friend.'" Peter was so sad. He knew he had failed Jesus again and again and again. He didn't just need to find other people who needed forgiving. Peter needed forgiving too. Peter felt terrible. He ran out of the courtyard and he cried and he cried and he cried. Peter had let his best friend down, and now it was too late because the soldiers had taken Jesus away to be killed. But Peter didn't stay sad because Jesus didn't stay dead. 3 days later was the first Easter Sunday when Jesus came back to life to offer forgiveness. He would forgive Peter, but would he forgive Peter for failing so badly? Well, one day Jesus went out looking for Peter. Where do you think Jesus found him? That's right. Peter and his friends were fishing. Jesus called to them from the beach. Peter jumped out of the boat into the water, rushed to the beach to see Jesus, and this is where Jesus and Peter had fish for breakfast. Fish for breakfast? That's weird. Peter was so happy to see Jesus alive, but would Jesus forgive him? Peter wasn't sure. Maybe Jesus wouldn't want to talk to him. Maybe Jesus wouldn't want to be friends with him. But yes, Jesus did want to talk to Peter. And yes, Jesus did want to forgive Peter. Wow. And since Peter had said he didn't know Jesus 3 times, Jesus gave Peter the chance to say 3 times, I love you, Jesus. And that's how Peter became a forgiven fisher of men. Peter spent the rest of his life telling people about his best friend, Jesus, an instrument. He told them that if they put their trust in Jesus, he would forgive them again and again and again. That's because Jesus was Peter's best friend. He forgave him again and again and again. And if you trust in Jesus, he will forgive you too, again and again and again. Boys and girls, here's the truth. None of us are perfect. Each one of these instruments can easily break. And each one of these instruments, while made for a purpose, looks different, is different, sounds different. And Peter is not the kind of instrument that people would necessarily be drawn to. He was a little outspoken. He made mistakes. Had a rough exterior. But God had a purpose for Peter, and he was going to do something beautiful with Peter. So what people saw on the outside, God had placed something special on the inside. It's not just an ordinary stick. It's an instrument. It's called a rain stick. And it's actually one of my favorite instruments that we have. But it just looks ordinary on the outside. But if you listen to different, especially African pieces, they use that in such a beautiful way to bring together sound. That instrument has a purpose. Peter had a purpose. Jesus said, on this rock, on Peter, he would build his church. And God used Peter to build the church and to spread the word of Jesus all over. And he did. Peter faithfully served Jesus the rest of his life. Even though Peter was imperfect, God had placed something great in him. And he had given him a very specific purpose from the time he was made. Just like from the time you were made, you were given a specific purpose. You, each one of you, are God's workmanship. And if you believe in Jesus, you have been remade, renewed in him for a specific purpose. And the Lord is going to give you exactly what you need to do what he has called you to do. And what you cannot accomplish alone, God is not limited to what you can and cannot do. Because everything in all of creation is held in his hand. And remember how we talked about how huge the universe is, and yet God is bigger. So guys, if ever you feel like a failure, if ever you feel like just a lousy stick, like my rain stick over there, remember Peter, and remember that Jesus is greater. He's a friend that forgives. He's a friend that loves. He's a friend that gives purpose to us, to you and to me. And because of him, together, when we work in harmony, we can do great things.